This program is presented by the Associated General Contractors of America.
Dust. It's everywhere when you're working on a job site. On equipment. On your clothes. In the air. We all know a dusty environment makes breathing difficult and uncomfortable. However, besides this discomfort, there's a whole lot more at stake. Prolonged exposure to dust containing silica may lead to lung cancer. It can also lead to silicosis, a very serious and sometimes fatal lung disease. Silicosis has no cure, so prevention is the only answer.
So where does silica come from anyway? Well, silica is one of the most common minerals in the Earth's crust and a major component of both sand and rock. Now that also makes silica a major component of some very common and essential construction materials like concrete, masonry products.
When these materials are broken down into a fine dust by jobs like jackhammering, rock drilling, concrete sawing, or abrasive blasting, airborne silica dust is released. Typically, when you breathe in dust, the larger particles are filtered out or captured by your respiratory system. However, dust particles that are too small to be seen can get into the lower lungs. If these dust particles contain silica, they can cause silicosis. What happens is, particles of silica that are inhaled become embedded in the lung. The lung tissue reacts by hardening and scarring around these trapped silica particles. This reduces the lung's ability to absorb oxygen from the air we breathe. The most common initial symptoms of silicosis are shortness of breath and coughing. Progression of the disease can lead to extreme shortness of breath, fatigue, pain in the chest, and possibly cardiac arrest. If you experience these symptoms and you've been working unprotected with silica dust for years, tell your supervisor and arrange to see a doctor who specializes in pulmonary or lung diseases as soon as possible.
Now, along with making breathing difficult, silicosis may also overwhelm the body's ability to fight infection. This makes you more susceptible to certain lung diseases like tuberculosis. Now, some of you may be smokers, and you've all heard about the health problems that smoking can lead to. But if you're working around dust, smoking can be even more trouble. If you smoke, your susceptibility to certain lung diseases will increase. Now, this is because smoking paralyzes the tiny hair-like cells called cilia that sweep foreign particles like silica out of your respiratory system. So the effects of silica exposure can be very serious. But just how long does it take for these symptoms to occur?
Extremely high exposure to silica dust over a short period of time can lead to conditions of acute silicosis, which can cause health effects in a matter of months. On the other hand, exposure to lower concentrations of silica over a long period of time can lead to conditions of chronic silicosis. There was a time when there were cases of acute silicosis, but today silicosis is mostly a chronic disease.
Chronic silicosis may go undetected for years in early stages. In fact, symptoms may not even develop until after 15 to 20 years of exposure. And because the warning signs aren't there, there's a tendency to skip protecting yourself right now. But since there is no cure for silicosis, now is the time to think about prevention. If an effort is made to reduce silica dust exposure for yourself and the others working around you, silicosis can be 100% preventable.
Everyone in construction is exposed to dust, but they don't all generate it. Workers operating dust-generating tools obviously face the greatest risk of silica dust exposure. But how about someone working 10 feet away? That person must also be protected. Before a project starts, the project supervisor, safety director, or foreman should make an assessment to find out how workers may be exposed to silica on the job site. If it is known that a particular construction operation will generate silica-containing dust for a significant amount of time, the contractor responsible should notify all other on-site contractors in advance so they can take appropriate action. For example, sometimes work is rescheduled or temporarily suspended in exposed areas. This is a good way to minimize the number of workers exposed to silica. Warning signs should be posted to mark the boundaries of work areas where silica dust will be generated.
The next step is to implement engineering controls to keep silica dust out of the air. Now, this means using special equipment or technology to prevent silica dust from spreading. It's up to you to make sure that these controls work.
One control method is to use materials containing less than 1% silica. Dry ice, steel shot, and walnut shells are examples of some alternative materials for abrasive blasting.
If substituting materials is not possible, other engineering controls need to be considered.
Using wet methods during rock drilling or concrete and masonry sawing helps keep dust out of the air and out of your lungs. If it's not possible to use wet methods, dust collectors may be an option. Dust collection systems are available for many types of dust-generating equipment, including needle guns, rotopeeners, and grinders. Keep this system well maintained, and don't use equipment if the dust control system is not working properly. Controlling dust doesn't have to be complicated. Dust controls can be as simple as keeping upwind of a dusty operation when you're outdoors, or cleaning dust from equipment with a water hose rather than compressed air. By using plastic sheeting over openings or just closing doors and windows, barriers can be created to contain silica dust and reduce exposure to surrounding workers.
Putting the necessary controls in place will protect you, but the dust can still get on your clothes. Don't let your clothes carry silica dust off the work site and into your car or your home. You want to keep the hazard on the work site, and this is how you do it.
Never blow or shake silica dust off your clothes. This will release it right into your breathing zone. The best way to remove dust is with a specially filtered vacuum. These vacuums are equipped with high-efficiency particulate air filters known as HEPA filters. These filters keep dust from being blown back into the air. Wearing protective clothing like disposable coveralls is another good way to keep silica off you. Be sure the coveralls are intact and replace them if they rip or tear. Just as silica dust can get on your clothes, it can also settle on your hair or skin. You don't want to accidentally inhale any silica particles that might be on you. So maintaining good personal hygiene is important when working in these conditions. Never eat, drink, or smoke in dusty areas. And always wash your hands and face before eating, drinking, or smoking outside the controlled area.
So by planning ahead, we've limited the number of workers who may be exposed to silica because they're working nearby. We've also implemented engineering controls to make sure that those who are working with materials containing silica aren't exposed to airborne dust. Now, we all know that engineering controls are the best way to limit exposure to silica and should always be considered as a first line of defense. But there may be some jobs that are too short or just can't be controlled adequately. In these cases, you need respiratory protection.
It's important that the correct respirator is chosen for the job. Respirator selection depends on the silica exposure level. Keep in mind, a proper respirator for one job may not be sufficient for another. For example, when grinding concrete, many times a half mask or full-face particulate filter respirator will be sufficient. On the other hand, abrasive blasting with silica sand or any abrasive blasting on concrete requires a specific atmosphere-supplying respirator.
Remember, simply putting up with high dust levels is not acceptable. But once the work begins, how can you tell if the controls chosen are adequately protecting you?
This can be done by air monitoring. Air monitoring measures how much silica is in the air by taking a sample of air from your breathing zone. To take an air sample, a small battery-operated pump is attached to your belt or waistband. This is connected to a filter and pre-filter assembly that is attached near your collar so it samples the air you're breathing. Typically, the filter is worn for a day and then sent off to a laboratory for analysis. If air monitoring results show that engineering controls are working, then you don't need respiratory protection as long as conditions remain constant. However, until an exposure assessment is completed, either by air monitoring or use of past experience on a similar project, respirators should be worn.
As mentioned earlier, the symptoms of silicosis may not be visible for years. As a result, workers who are regularly exposed to high concentrations of silica should contact their healthcare provider so that appropriate silica-related tests can be included during regular checkups.
Appropriate tests may include a medical and work history, a chest X-ray, pulmonary function testing, and an annual evaluation for tuberculosis. These examinations should always supplement effective dust monitoring and controls, never substitute for them.
When you're working on a job site, you've always got to be aware of your surroundings. And let's face it, being around dust is nothing new on a construction site. Now, although it may seem like you can just ignore the dust in the air, just tolerate it and move on, silica dust is a serious health hazard that cannot be ignored and needs to be dealt with. Because silica is such a common component of materials you see all the time on almost all job sites, it's important for you to know how to minimize your exposure.
If your job does not require you to be there, stay out of silica work areas and keep others away from silica-generating tasks. Use engineering controls to contain the dust at its source before it becomes airborne, and substitute silica-free abrasives whenever possible. Observe proper hygiene. Use a respirator if controls in place can't keep silica exposures below permissible limits, and conduct air monitoring to determine if controls are working.
Although the visible effects and symptoms of silicosis may take a long time to develop, it's definitely not something that you want to look forward to or take lightly. A few simple precautions now will save you a future of pain and discomfort. Don't let silica take your breath away.